Welcome, Kellogg community. I'm Michaela Doyle with the Kellogg School of Management. Thank you for joining us today for Conversations with Kellogg Leaders featuring Ginny Clarke. In this webinar series, Dean Corneli speaks with Kellogg alumni leaders on timely issues and challenges facing the global business community. You can catch up on prior webinars in this series at our virtual events page on the Kellogg alumni website. We will put a link to that site into the chat now. Today's presentation will last 1 hour, and we invite you to submit questions for our speaker at any time using the Q&A icon that's located at the bottom of your screen. We will address audience questions throughout the conversation, and with that, I'm happy to welcome Dean Francesca Corneli.
Hello, everyone. So glad to continue this amazing series with another amazing alumna, Ginny Clarke. I love Ginny. I can't wait from you to hear from you all to hear from her. She is representing exactly what we talk about at Kellogg, right? We talk so much about leadership. We teach about leadership. She is inspirational in talking about leadership. She is the CEO of Ginny Clarke LLC, and she has a great experience and insight as a former executive at Spencer Stuart and Google, and she has a lot of experience on conscious leadership and entrepreneurship. She has written a book in 2011, Career Mapping, Charting Your Course in the New World of Work. That was new in 2011. She's starting a new book, so we'll have to hear from that too. But I am so excited to have her. Ginny, thank you so much for coming.
Dean Corneli, you know I do anything for you. And it's always a pleasure to be able to speak to Kellogg alums and students. It's Kellogg has been such an important part of my life, not just professional life, but my life.
That's amazing. So let's start. Let me start by asking, right? You left Google in 2020 and you had a lot of time to reflect on your amazing career, executive recruiting. I know you do speaking, executive coaching, content creation, so much. And like how do and you're growing, right? Your audience, just now we were talking about and exciting new opportunities. So how do you build your brands and social media following? I'm sure there's so many who are interested in that.
Yeah, so my transition was kind of interesting. While I was still at Google, I got invited to speak inside of Google a lot because of the book, the career mapping book. And I had also done some leadership stuff with them in addition to the executive recruiting activities that I was hired to do. And I was introduced to someone who introduced me to a speaking coach, which I had never considered getting because I thought, well, I'm a pretty good speaker anyway. She's not teaching you exactly what to say and how to stand and, all these things. It's more so how you construct your speech. Because writing is one thing. When you're standing up and saying something, it takes on a whole different tone. So I started working with her the year before I left during that last year at Google. And so by the time I decided to leave, it was during COVID, right? And I hung around Silicon Valley, in the Bay Area, South Bay, for a few more months. And then I moved back to Chicago. And during that time, I was introduced to Leading Authorities, one of the big speakers bureaus out of Washington, D.C. And I did sort of an audition. And one of the representatives called me on the phone after I finished. She said, "Girlfriend," I didn't know this woman. "I've never heard anybody speak like that before." And so that was the beginning of what has been a really enjoyable engagement with them to speak. And I've done, several hundred speeches, paid speeches over the last few years. It's been really gratifying. And I will just add this. What it did is it helped me solidify all of the things that had been happening in that 35-year career up until that point. And it was the Google experience was sort of the cherry on top in some ways. I mean, it wasn't like a perfect experience for me, but what I learned was unbelievable in shaping my messaging. So that was really clarifying. And on the social media part, I will say I wasn't a fan. I'm very private. I don't like a lot of the nonsense that goes on in social media. I'm not going to show you, me walking down the street and all these other things that seem really silly to me. But I asked around to someone, I said, I need something. I don't even know what it is. Is it a public relations person? He worked for a media company. He said, listen, before you do anything, and the guy had worked with Brene Brown and with Susie Orman. I thought, okay, so that's why I'm calling you.
Yes.
And I said, he said, before you do anything, call this guy. And I'm like, he's a coach. And he goes, yeah, he's a really good coach and a business advisor. I'm like, okay. So I reached out to him. And as soon as I met him, I knew that he was who I needed to work with. And so we've been working together since the end of 2022. So we're going into our third year together. He's a business advisor. He's really helped me think through how I need to move things forward as a business, not just content creation or, social media, whatever that looks like.
That's so interesting. 'Cause the idea is sometimes you see people are doing so well and it looks so like, oh, natural. But as you say, there's a lot of thought that goes
A
into
lot,
it.
a
And
lot.
how did you go also building your team for
Yeah,
achieving?
well, this is why Andy was so pivotal. I mean, I've told him that he literally changed my life. And it wasn't as much, I mean, his coaching is phenomenal. And I call it coaching. It's not do this and do that. It's more so, have you thought about this? He really pushes me to think beyond some of the limitations that I set for myself unwittingly, right? So he turned me on to a content creator, someone that he knew. And that was sort of happenstance. She had come across his radar and he said, what about this woman? I'm like, that's who I need. So she produces, I go to New York quarterly and I produce 3 months worth of content with her for my YouTube channel and social. And then she does a whole lot of the other stuff. Earlier this year, I retained, or last year, it was May of, I haven't transitioned in 2025 fully. May of 2024, started working with a marketing organization who on their resume is having done work with Esther Perel, the psychotherapist, if you're familiar with her.
Yes.
And so they are helping me. They've done all these analytics and helping me build a bigger mailing list. And I'm launching my first leadership course on March 3rd. So I'm really excited about that. So it's just been an evolution of things to get me to this place to put out a message for workers, for the workforce, who at every level, not just leaders. And when I say leaders, I don't just mean those people in leadership roles. I'm referring to everyone in the workforce, because I think that's the whole point is people are feeling helpless and hopeless. And I want to be able to say, no, you don't have to just take that. There are things that you can do structurally, organizationally for yourself from a career standpoint to help make your workplace better, not just for yourself, but for others, and even teach certain leaders how you need to be treated. Because a lot of leaders, this is something that came very much to light for me. A lot of leaders are never assessed on the basis of leadership competencies. They're assessed on the basis of, you're really smart or you're a subject matter expert. And unfortunately, that doesn't translate. And so a lot of folks, and there was a Gallup poll from 2016 that said that only 18% of leaders are considered good at leading. And that's a pretty sad commentary.
That is very sad, right? And yeah, we hear about so many people who leave their job
Yeah,
because of like uninspiring bosses.
exactly.
So, how do we make leadership more accountable then?
Structurally in the way that we're trained at Kellogg to think about these things. Well, the
Yes.
board should be the one who is doing that, but unfortunately, they haven't gotten that memo. And I'm not going to try to influence that, but I am going to try to influence both leaders on how might you get better. Are you self-aware enough, for starters, to begin to see that it's not necessarily working for you? You might be hitting your numbers, but what does your employee engagement survey say about you? Are you reading that? Are you taking it seriously? Do you care? We need you to care. These are people. We're human and we need each other. So that's where the conscious leadership piece comes in for me. I'm really trying to get people at all levels to begin to think about themselves, their needs, their well-being, then that includes their mental health. And how can you bring a level of peace and comfort and safety into the workplace so that you're getting greater productivity, greater profitability, all these other things that we know that that can lead to.
That is so interesting. I will have to talk a lot more about leadership, but I'm also interested. We were talking about the transition, right? You
Mhm.
went from a big corporations to this alone and said, what did you learn about yourself in this 4.5 years? I'm curious.
Um, Man, I learned a lot about myself. It's been it's been quite a journey, and I'm part of, you know me pretty well, and I am a deeply spiritual person. Having
Yes.
lost my parents when I was in my 30s, I felt like I needed a place to go where I could feel connected to them, and that I was introduced to a healer who turned me on to meditation and expanded consciousness. And so that's part of where, when I say conscious leadership, that is indeed the reference. Consciousness is really about awareness, plain and simple. If you want to add the spiritual element to it, you can. If you don't, that's okay too. But I'm saying, what is it that you need? So for me, I mentioned the speaking, that in and of itself, and writing the speeches, because I had to come up with, 4 or 5 different speeches. And so writing those, that process of writing things out where I had to tell stories about my own life, about, what holds meaning for me, how I developed into a strong leader myself. And so that was a lot of what I learned. And some of what I learned was that, as I said, the spirituality was really important to me. And I didn't want to segregate that from being a leader. And so putting those together made a lot of sense. And I also learned that my voice is distinctive. It's
Absolutely.
it's not, because you have to understand, growing up, my parents were amazing, and they came up, brought me up early in the civil rights era, and so they were all about service. My dad was a former prison warden with the state of California. My mother was a physical therapist, originally from Tuskegee, Alabama. And so the humility and service were at the core of their messaging to me, and excellence, education, all those things for me and my brother. And so that, I think, kind of made me in some cases realize that I was playing small, that humility thing, you're no better or worse than anybody else, do well, but don't self-promote. And so that's one of the reasons why, once I got into doing some of this work, I had to say, it's okay for me to be out here. I have a message. This is about service. And so through that lens, I've been able to sort of come out of my shell, so to speak. It's not that I'm shy, obviously.
No.
But we have all these lessons that we've learned that sometimes hold us back in certain arenas.
And talking about your message, right? I know you're writing your second book on 5 dimensions of conscious leadership. Can't wait to see it. But what is very interesting is most of people, when they talk about leadership, they talk about how they engage with people, right? That's how I thought about it.
Mhm.
But your first dimension is know yourself.
That's right.
Why is that so important?
Um, it was during my time at Google that I did a couple things. They brought me in, interestingly, to focus on diversity and executive recruiting. They had just segregated their talent acquisition organization that was like 1,500 people, recruiters.
Wow.
Yeah, because they managed, 4 million applicants a year and hired 25,000. But at the leadership level, the director plus level, I, as being trained at Spencer Stuart, you don't go through applicants, you go find people, right?
Yes.
And so that was a whole transition in and of itself, trying to get them to understand the importance, the hiring managers to understand the importance of the clarity that they needed in order to make strong hires. So that was important for me. And then I also created an internal mobility program. And that's when I started getting up close and personal and basically coaching certain leaders who had been referred into us that Google wanted to retain. And that's where I started watching and realizing that a lot of these folks didn't have that level of self-awareness that was required. And that's where I came up with the first dimension of conscious leadership, being know yourself. If you don't know yourself, it's really hard to connect with someone else. If you don't know what makes you tick, I've run into a few narcissists in my life, and they aren't generally self-aware. They're coming,
Yeah.
their world is their own, you know. I'm not going to try to change that, but I need to understand that when I'm thinking about who it is that I want to represent and promote as a strong leader.
So interesting. And I know you go to talk to a lot of large organization. I know
Mhm.
why, because I think you're amazing, but they may not be for, like, what is the reason why they ask you to go and talk to the leaders?
Yeah. It's a variety of things now that I've had. My YouTube channel has been pretty robust over the last couple of years. I get people who are might be lower in an organization who are going to people and saying, "Can you get this person to come speak to us?" Which is great. The Speakers Bureau does a nice job of promoting me as well. Certainly, the Google name, at least in the early years, was attractive. The Spencer Stuart name, those things. Let's face it.
Of course.
Spencer Stuart, one of the largest and most reputable search firms in the world. Google, trillion
Yes.
dollar. I mean, it's ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Um, and in my speech, what I'm offering is generally for most of them, it has elements of three pillars that I talk about. And these are things that I don't think a lot of people think about together. But the first one is really building a foundation for talent. And I don't see myself as an HR person necessarily. That's the group that I sat in when I was inside of an organization.
Yeah.
But as an executive recruiter, I was trained to think like a management consultant. And so that's how I break down these elements of the first one. You need a structure and a foundation for talent. And so I talk about that. The second one is optimizing that talent. And that is things like how are you hiring and promoting and progressing people? What are all of these different pieces that get people to stay? How do you build retention? And who needs to have ownership of that? Leaders that who don't often realize that, right?
Yes.
Um, and the third one, I talk about the burning need for conscious leadership, and I break down what I think that means, specifically these leadership competencies that I keep talking about, because I think a lot of people don't understand that those are the behaviors that a leader needs to have demonstrated some prowess in. We're constantly learning, but that should be a lot of what, in addition to subject matter expertise, a lot of what someone is assessed against to be considered a strong leader.
So these days we see so many organizations, they get stuck, they fall short, it doesn't work. Why is it the focus of people on attracting people, on their competence? Why do we need that, or can an organization get unstuck naturally?
Um, you know, I think they can get unstuck. I think it's what has them stuck is holding on to some systems that are antiquated. And that's
Mm,
part of why I'm talking about, have you looked at your HR system? Again, I'm not an HR person per se, but that is where a lot of my expertise kind of rests if you stick it into an organization. And I think, who is owning that? Where is the accountability for that? Because, for example, everybody goes through their performance evaluations a couple times a year,
yes.
hopefully, at least that. And has anybody kind of said, all right, we're doing this, but how does this tie into what's going to happen next? Right? Your compensation, your next career moves, all of these things. And a lot of times the leader doesn't even understand that they are partly responsible for that. And it struck me when I was at Google, I had a team of 30, because I had three different teams. I had a diversity group,
Yes.
the internal mobility, and then the non-tech recruiters. I had six direct reports that I had tapped in. So that's who I spent a lot of time with. And then I made sure I spent time with everybody else. But when it came for the review period, I thought, oh my God, this is going to be, because they call it perf. And it was this lengthy system. And I thought, oh, this is going to take forever. And I went, wait a minute, let me reframe this. Who am I doing this for? This isn't for HR. This is for me. This
Ah,
is for me as the leader. I need to have this information. Is it cumbersome to extract? Yeah, but we can fix that later. But when I understood that, that became all important because that is who it's for. And I think a lot of leaders don't get that. It's for me to manage and lead my people better, knowing who they are, listening to what their needs are, helping them get better, offering them feedback. And this is where I think a lot of organizations are stuck. They are not looking at the systems, they're not overhauling them, they're not holding the right people accountable for honoring those systems.
That is so important. You're basically telling them to take a step back and think it through instead of the next step. But let me ask you, there's another dimension in which I feel organizations these days have to take it back or figure it out, which is we have so much polarization, political in society, in so many aspects, right? And yeah, a leader has to lead in a world where people don't agree. So, how can a leader model good behavior?
Um, I'm going to go back to another one point around the system, right?
Yes.
Because the way, to me, the system needs to really represent um, integrity, truth, right? Honesty, which is based on respect that is earned by the leader. It's like, are you trustworthy? If you're not, as a leader, if people don't trust you, they can't respect you. And it's less about being liked, which I think is overblown, and it's more about being respected. And so it's not about dominance, but it is about this honoring, right? Because I fear that we're sort of getting away from when we talk about things being merit worthy and being qualified, right? But I think we need to make sure that we are encouraging inclusion in spite of whatever forces there might be, that we're encouraging excellence and not mediocrity, that we're encouraging good well-being and not toxicity. So that's part of where I think we need to get better at those things to really be unstuck and to start moving forward in these systems.
So important. So you think the workforce, sorry, the workplace can be a refuge from outside discourse, or there's no way to avoid it?
I want to believe that it can be a refuge. I want to believe it. We're not there yet. We have work to do, which is why I'm also suggesting I sort of break it down this way. At Google, the director plus population was about 2% of the overall population, about 5,000 people. And that's grown since I've left, of course. But I think that percentage, if you kind of widen it, round it up to 5%. So you got 5% of the workforce sitting in leadership roles. The other
Yes.
95 are everybody else that I'm talking to and trying to say, here's how you can make this better for you. Here's how and not just you, but others in your organization to the extent that it's not healthy, that you don't feel safe. So I think that, for example, feedback needs to, I mentioned that earlier, everybody needs to get good at that, going both ways. Now, you might be talking to a leader who's not open to it, so be judicious. You don't want retaliation, but you should be opening these channels to have a rich conversation so that you can grow and so that the leader can grow. They're not static. I mean, that's part of what I think people need to understand, that 5% need to know you have agency sitting inside of an organization. I don't care how low you might be and from a leveling standpoint, you can be in the mailroom, but you still have a right to stand up for yourself and expect fair treatment. So, and a lot of people will say to me on social media, HR isn't going to help you and they work for the organization. Whether or not that's true, you'll have to figure that out for yourself. But I still think it's worth. This isn't indentured servitude. This isn't slavery anymore, you all. It's time that we have a voice that is constructive, that is positive, and that drives change inside the organization. Because I fear that the 5%, some of them, not all, are operating from an archaic mindset that says that if they're, to the extent they're dominant in the organization, they get to dictate down. Well, last time I checked, democratic, that's not useful, that's not anything else, right? So we need to teach them and demonstrate to them how they can become better leaders and connect if they're so inclined. If they're not, at some point, you got to take care of yourself and you have to decide if you can stay on that team.
That's so important. There's in the meantime a lot of questions, so let me choose a few of them. This one
Good.
says, I am curious to know, in your experience, why do leaders not seem to get constructive feedback the way mid-level managers, directors do?
Um, yeah, it's amazing, right? I think sometimes they don't want to hear it, right? They can't, in some cases, it hasn't been modeled to them so that they even know what to do with it if they do hear it. Not a great excuse, but I think a reality. And that's where I think some of the 95% can offer. This is what I need. This is what I would ask that you share with me. If I ask you how I did on my presentation, for you to just tell me it was good is not helping me. So maybe you give them an example of what you would want to hear. Help them out, because again, we have been taught and socialized in some cases to put these leaders on a pedestal and assume that they know what we want. It was my father who told me early in my career. I told you he was a prison warden, but one of the best leaders I came to realize
Ah,
that I was ever exposed to. And he said, tell people what you want. I was venting to him that I was kind of burned out on my one job and I wanted to do something else. He said, tell your manager what it is that you have your sights set on.
mhm.
He said, because I can't tell you how many people come to me after a couple of years and say, I thought you knew. And he's like, I got, 600 employees, I mean, you got to tell me. So
You're right.
that would be a really important piece of this whole feedback equation. Help them out.
That's very interesting. And here, given that is a couple of times you mentioned your family, but it says here, can you tell us one or two formative moments that helped build you into the
Hmm.
leader you are today? Maybe the
Um,
one you just gave me, but it's okay.
yeah, no, I'm trying to think back. I mean, the first two are some of the leaders that I had who weren't so good, right? There was one early in my days. I started in the commercial real estate business after a couple years in banking before I got into executive recruiting. And I was at this one company, big global organization. You can see it if you go on my LinkedIn page, it'll all be there. Um, but I had joined this person's team and I didn't even meet him for 2 months. I didn't interview with him. Somebody else hired me. He never even made an effort to get to know who I was. The team wasn't 600 people. It was, I don't know, 30, something like that.
Yeah, so
Um, so that was that. I put a pin in that. I'm like, that's not cool. I don't know what that's about. Let me not jump to conclusions about why. I was one of only, I think, 3 or 4 Black professionals at the firm at that time. Could have been it. There were a lot more women, but sometimes men aren't comfortable having professional conversations with women. That's still the course. It's still the case, believe it or not, right? So that's one. And then the other would be a great leader that I had later, maybe 10 years later, who gave me great feedback and engaged and asked questions about what I needed and how he could help me grow. And every Friday afternoon, we debrief and he'd give me feedback on, how'd you do this week? What's happening? How can I help you? And that to me, you're part coach. You're part, if you care enough about your people, you got to get in there and have conversations. You can't just push things down from on high. That's an old model.
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of questions, but there's so many. I want to ask a couple more and then we'll go back also. But who are some of the thought leaders in consciousness and awareness that have been most influential on your journey?
Mm. Wow. I've read a lot of books on spirituality and consciousness. And I would say one of the ones that I liked the best, and this had nothing to do with business, um, The Power of Awareness by Neville Goddard. And he's really talking about how you need to talk to yourself, how you need to begin to manifest and reprogram some of your own beliefs that can get in the way of you um, having the life that you want. I think we think sometimes that life happens to us. It's my belief system that says I'm creating my life. And it took me a while to understand that. But when I'm deliberate, when I decide, and that's what the career mapping book is about. It's like you decide what you want. I don't care where you went to school. I don't care what your other jobs have been. If you want to go over and do this thing, you find a way to pull together the elements first in your mind, and that's how you begin to make things happen. I never applied for a job in my entire career. Never. I don't know if you knew this.
I didn't know that. That's
Never.
interesting. I'm not surprised, but
Well, because I made these moves from banking to commercial real estate to executive recruiting, what I did well that I figured out on my own, I was able to look at my set of competencies, experiences that yielded competencies, and I was able to bring them together and build a narrative that I could express to someone that said, here's why I know I can do what you need done. And here's why this role, I've decided that this is what I need to be doing for my highest and best use and for your benefit too. So I think that is part of all of this, that we need to begin to own that agency piece, where we're going to go and set the course for ourselves.
so interesting. I have to ask one more because they're clearly all testing about your knowledge and your expert. Because there's this question says, I follow you on LinkedIn and always appreciate your posts.
Oh,
Who do you follow on LinkedIn whom you would recommend to us?
I follow a bunch of people, but I don't always read their stuff just because
I know.
I don't.
Easy.
I do follow Satya Nadella. He has been, I think, and I've known and tried to recruit a few people out of Microsoft. And in a couple cases, I will tell you, I never met him, but I've watched him and I've spoken to a lot of very senior people who worked under him. And I think they say really positive things. And he stepped in to block the hire of at least two people we were actively trying to recruit into Google. And he said, no, you are on my succession list and I'm not letting you go. That to me, that alone is the great sign of a leader.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. That's fantastic. Now,
Yeah.
before I go to question, I have so many of my question I want to ask. This one is interesting, because we were talking before about polarization, right? And there's so many, workers these days, they're concerned, depend, right, about changes. Do you think top executives should speak up on behalf of their employees in the wider world? It's a difficult position these days, right, for top executives?
Yeah. Um, I do. I do. I mean, they're the ones who have a voice.
Yeah.
And the reason for a hierarchy is that the intended person at the top of that hierarchy, which that structure alone probably needs to be rethought, but now let's go with what we have. There's an expectation. If you're sitting at the top of that heap, you're in that top role or in the top whatever percentage, the top 1% of your organization, you have an obligation to your team members to represent their interests. To me, fundamentally, that's what that means as a leader. It requires that you know, right? And that I think some people are so disconnected as leaders that they're not asking their directs, and those directs are not asking their directs. So you end up you need people who have a finger on the pulse of the people in their organization. That's who's making stuff work in your company. You owe it to them to represent their interests. Anything else to me is any lapse of that is just inexcusable.
That's so important.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you, you've been advocating, right? Like leaders need to step away from their own egos, lead with empathy, be trustworthy. how we and you're also talking about how you move away from tolerance to acceptance. Now, what does that look like, right? They have a lot of people online. How do we teach them that?
Um, I think it goes back to something that I said that my parents instilled in me, which says, I'm no better or worse than anybody else. I need to, and our leaders need to have that same humility to be able to question some of their decisions, to be able to poll and have that finger on the pulse of what everybody else is thinking. And it requires being, yes, deliberate, but at the same time having an open mind and being curious about, what does that look like? You ask. I think what it means is that we stop putting people who are, I used this term before, narcissist, or I dare say psychologically impaired, into leadership roles, that we start assessing people differently for these leadership roles, even if they're smart, even if they're wealthy, even if they have lots of experience, even if they're charismatic. We need to start looking at things that actually matter in terms of how we are inspiring people to get things done. Yes, have a vision. Yes, have a track record of excellence and productivity and all these other things. But how have you treated people along the way?
Yes, yeah.
That empathy, that tolerance, that's where that comes from. So give me an example, right? That's one of my favorite ways of when I was interviewing people. Give me an example when you did XYZ. It's not, have you done it before? Because you could have done it poorly. I want you to tell me how you did it. That's competency-based assessment.
That's amazing. I'm taking notes, Jenny, while you talk, because it's so important. Yes. Now, there's a question here that I hope you can help me because I don't. So it says, what is your route to addressing a person who is not self-conscious, where you have no badna? I have to admit, I don't know what badna means, to not address the situation or walk away when they are the problem?
Well, one approach might be, to the extent that you're not the only one who's being treated this way, is that you
Mm,
find allies inside of your organization, on your
very
team.
good point.
Maybe there are people who have witnessed certain bad behaviors from this leader. So before you go run into HR, right, kind of take stock. Is this person, is this chronic and pervasive that they treat people this way? Is it specific to you? Because if it's specific to you, sometimes the most unsettling thing for them would be for you to confront them and say, listen, I've noticed that when we have meetings, you don't seem to really pay close attention to what I'm talking about. And I'm looking, here are my objectives. I would really appreciate you supporting me in doing these things. I think that would make it easier for me, and it would help me grow into a better leader for my team. So you're not saying, I don't like the way you're treating me,
Yes,
but you are
exactly,
saying
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yes,
you're mature, you're not emotional, especially as women, because we get accused of that,
I
which
know.
ticks me off. Um, we're feeling, yes, and we need more feeling. This is the time of the divine feminine, by the way. We need more feeling and
Absolutely.
empathy. So that would be just a suggestion, is that before you feel like you have to walk away, and sometimes that is your only option, um, try to see if you can have a conversation where you're really cutting through some stuff and getting to this, whatever is really at the root of this issue.
And there's another related question here that says, what learning lessons could Kellogg leaders benefit from
Mm.
regarding how to navigate working with HR early on when bringing up toxic leadership concerns in an organization? And how often does retaliation occur anyway? That's a tough situation.
Yeah, and I don't have any stats. I think retaliation is probably more prevalent than we realize. You might
Wow.
check with SHRM, Society of Human Resources Management. You can subscribe or download some stuff from their website. They track some of this stuff. They did a big thing on incivility. I remember that they talked about how there are 161 million acts of incivility a day, and there are, no, I think 171 million acts and 161 million workers in the workforce. So
Wow.
that's more than one per person every single day. So that to me takes the form of toxicity, which includes retaliation. So that's why I'm getting to, I think the prevalence is kind of high. And you would think, come on, we're grown-ups. Why are you going to just turn around and do something snarky and unprofessional to me? Um, so remind me what your original question was. Like go off on these tangents, but
No, it's like what people could learn on how to do, how to take care of that
yeah,
early on in
yeah.
the,
I'll go back to my approach, which is confront the person in a professional way and say, listen, I don't think I'm being treated fairly here. What can you tell me? I'm frustrated. I don't know if it's you. I don't know if it's somebody else. I don't know what you know about me. I'd love for us to just kind of clear the air and figure out what's in the way. Is it my style? But this is who I am, but I'm willing to take some lessons from you. Like, as a leader, show me some stuff. Teach me something I don't know. That's what I'm asking of you. So help me out. And with that in mind, I think you'll know to the extent to which this person has a level of self-awareness, a level of humility, and that they're actually invested in you, because that's what you're asking for.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Ginny, I'm getting so many questions. You're clearly inspiring people. This is another one says, this is a great conversation. Thank you. How
Oh,
to approach when you're one out of many hundred staff, but find that your top C-suite leadership is not inspirational, not motivational, and you're losing respect for the top leadership, but you love your job and your direct leaders, so you don't want to leave.
that could be tough because it sounds like you're inside a pretty large organization.
Yeah.
And, to the extent that they even do employee engagement surveys, it doesn't sound like they're paying attention to them or not taking them seriously if they are reading them. Maybe there's a task force. You don't even hear about those much anymore. But maybe if you recommended or volunteered, maybe
Mm.
it's through an employee resource group where there's already an assemblage of people and you kind of became a member or maybe a leader of it and said, these are the things that are important to me. And or just saying, I want to get this assemblage of, maybe you find some other people who are more senior than you who have a similar interest. And you can say, we want to meet as just the ear, call it whatever you will. We want to be able to meet with senior leaders quarterly to share some of what we're seeing and feeling and hearing in our organization that they might not be aware of. So you're offering sort of a win-win
Yes.
for them to get some real-time feedback from what people are experiencing. It's worth asking. I mean, I'm coaching someone who's in a law firm, a really large global law firm, a woman, and she went to her leadership and said, we have these office managers, but what if there was a deputy? What if there was a number two? There was someone that we knew was going to succeed them that could shadow them in preparation for consideration. Not, it wasn't a guarantee to get the role, but to shadow them. So similarly, I'm suggesting create a role for yourself that would be additive, that helps, whether it's with succession planning or just the general operations of the organization. It's worth asking about. They're not thinking about it.
It's so interesting, Jay. What I hear you saying is we can all take the initiatives and not be passive. We can at least try, worth try and do it. Now, I want to ask, and then I'll come back to my question. I know time is flying, but this is a slightly different type of business. So I was interested in your point of view. If you are
Yeah.
in a family business, and as you
Mhm.
know, Kellogg is very big in that
Yeah.
space,
Yeah.
how can you convince the family to be objective and realistic about everyone, including the patriarch evaluating his son or daughter?
That can be really, really hard to do. As a recruiter, when I was at Spencer Stuart, we managed some of those situations, and we were glad that the patriarch or matriarch invited us in to do an assessment of not only some of their children, but also recommending or at least benchmarking with some outside, some external talent that were in our universe. That to me makes a lot of sense. I just think, and sometimes there's a family office kind of a situation where they're used to getting consultations, at least financial consultations from outsiders, but in a closed group. So I think urging that process of let us assess them, and here are the criteria against which we're going to assess based on what you tell us you need in the business today. Okay, today and for the next, call it 5 years. So this
Yes.
isn't just this obscure, well, here's our job description, or here's what they've been doing, and here's what dad does. Those things might not be right either. So getting a real specific job description that aligns with the business needs of today, and then showing them what the critical competencies are associated with executing on those activities and priorities, and then getting some feedback from objective third parties like executive recruiters.
I can see you're really an expert on all these things. Now, let me ask before we finish, I want to make sure to ask something about empathy and acceptance because we talk about so much at Kellogg about empathy, and then sometimes people interpret it not like, oh, we are just being nice to
Fuzzy feeling,
everybody,
yeah.
or people pleaser, or just avoiding difficult conversation. But how can you have empathy and still be grounded to the truth to solve problems?
Yeah, it's so funny you asked that because I think for whatever reason we've sort of it's taken that word empathy to mean to suggest a level of weakness, you know?
Yes,
And
exactly. That
to me, it's to the contrary. I think being truly empathetic, and this is some of what I saw from my father, he had the biggest heart of any man I ever knew. And yes, I was a daddy's girl. I was. But I'm also very much in his image, which is I'm also tough as nails. They're not mutually exclusive, right? I have high standards, but I'm not, I'm also not a people pleaser. So I say a couple things when I'm talking in my speeches. I'm saying that I think a lot of leaders have fallen into that people-pleasing orientation, and some of it, I'm convinced, can't prove it, is derived from social media where we all like to be liked. It's like I go on Instagram, I'm like, how many likes did I get? Well, does it really matter? I mean, for the post, yeah, but is that a commentary about who I am? No, it's not. So
yes.
we need to get away from being liked because that is going to diminish the efficacy of your decision making. Okay. So I don't need you to like me, but I do need you to respect me. That's something that my mother said when I was young.
Important.
You don't have to like me, but you will respect me. And respect is earned, as I said earlier. So I think that's really important to understand. We also have to get good at giving that feedback because that people pleasing tendency falls into, oh, I'm just going to tell you everything I think you want to hear to be nice. That's not helping me. I need you to tell me what I need to hear. And it would be great if you could tell me with a level of empathy, right? I don't need you to just berate me, but tell me what I need, and I will respect you more if you can put it in competency-based language. Quick example. I always remember this one. At Spencer Stuart, it was a matrix structure. Professional services, your boss is kind of moves around. But my boss at the time, the head of my practice area, gave me feedback after I made a presentation. He said, I thought you present really, really well. He said, but I thought you needed to have a better handle on the numbers that you were quoting. And I was like, great, thank you. I can work with that. And I remembered that and integrated that into every speech I ever gave since. So how hard was that? He didn't hurt my feelings, right? And if your feelings are getting hurt, then are you sure you're in this? Are you in the right kind of work? So we all need to kind of buck up and understand what is genuine constructive feedback and what is, someone attacking you and berating you. They're quite different. And you will know your body, you'll react differently to one versus the other because the
Absolutely.
empathy comes through.
it is another question here about a bit of the trade-off. Like, say, where do you draw the fine line between leadership's responsibility to inspire and get the most out of others, and personal responsibility to strive for excellence in spite of the hardships that come with leaving?
Um, I don't draw such a tight line.
Uh,
I think you
Come
can
together, you say, yes.
I think they can work together. You can inspire people. Part of being a leader means you have a vision. So you share that vision, you articulate that to your folks, but you're also sharing what some of the real-time considerations are. Like, listen, guys, we're going through a rough time right now. And here's what I need you to know. I always say we should be here when it comes to whatever the numbers are. If you don't get there, I understand. Okay. But tell me what you need that's changed so that I can help you try to achieve that. Or if you can't, let me know that too. So the humility piece again, leaders need to understand you're not supposed to have all the answers. You're not. And you are doing your team a disservice if you are not asking them some questions. They're closer to it. Get their feedback, right, on what's happening in the moment. Get some of their ideas for solutions. So take some weight off yourself. You're not supposed to know it all.
So let me ask you, because I need to finish with my Kellogg questions, right? Because I'm sure everybody, and I can see from the question that keep arriving, getting inspired while you're talking. So, how did your time at Kellogg help you to recognize leadership skills, work with the talent pool? We are not going to take all the merit, I know, because you're amazing on your own. But did Kellogg help you a little bit on your
It helped me a lot. I mean, and not just the 2 years that I was there. Those were amazing years. Actually, they were pretty magical. I mean, because I was on the admissions committee when I got to Kellogg as a student. I don't know if you even knew this, because
no?
I had been a recruiter at the University of California, Davis, where I got my undergrad. I worked for them for 2 years after I graduated. And then coming into Kellogg, I don't remember who the head of admissions was. It had come to me. But they said, well, why don't they always want a student on the committee? And so I was selected as that. So I was actually getting some of my peers admitted into Kellogg. So that was important. But Dean Jacobs was a phenomenal dean. Yeah,
Yes, I
you,
completely
you you
agree.
had big shoes
Such
to
a
fill,
visionary.
and
I
several
know.
in between who are pretty remarkable themselves. But I dare say you're doing an amazing job. Um, but I think, I was also president of the BMA when I was there. So Kellogg was rich in terms of getting me exposed to a lot of other students, not to mention, the opportunities to meet with different employers and exploring different areas that I might want to go into. So, I mean, it was, I think that the time there was 2 years over the last 40, okay? Two important years. But since then, um, the connection to the school, classmates, professors, you, programs like this one, this is the gift that keeps on giving. And, my son went to a different business undergrad, and we're sitting there as he was being sort of introduced and oriented about it. And they said, we have 350,000 alumni or whatever the number was. And I elbowed him and I said, and that's what I'm paying for. So you owe it to yourselves to leverage your alumni base. Know your world. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Leverage it to your advantage, because that's where the richness comes from. And when you've got an amazing dean like this one, it only gets better.
Oh, thank you. But but I don't. Let me ask you one more thing, and then so you also these days you're not only a leader and expert on leadership, you're an entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
so.
this is my own business.
Did that also going back Kellogg? Is there something that helped you through that?
Well, because my parents were not entrepreneurs, I think being around classmates and professors
So
who talked about
important.
entrepreneurship and would integrate that into the different disciplines that they were talking about, that alone influenced me. I mean, and since then, entrepreneurship has just taken off. You
Yes.
know, everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, but not everybody is destined for it. And that's okay too. There's no judgment. It's know what you're good at. And for me, I had my own business when I left Spencer Stuart to write the book for several years, about 4 or 5 years. And I wasn't good at it because I hadn't really taken full assessment of what I am good at. And, managing the finances, hiring all the people, there were a lot of things, the business development, and I had to break down what are the actual things as the business owner that I'm good at versus what I need somebody else to do for me. Maybe not now, but eventually when I can afford to get it done. So Kellogg definitely oriented me around entrepreneurship.
That's amazing. That's so important. We always learn also from the others. Ginny, I'm afraid. I mean, I still have a lot of questions here. I apologize. It's just that they kept arriving, and
That's
we
good.
are a bit too late. But I want to say, I am so glad that so many people had the opportunity to hear, how thoughtful and how impactful and inspirational you are. I can't wait to see your new book. When it's coming out?
I'm
We don't
sending
know
the
yet.
proposal. UTA is representing me, and the proposal is going out at the end of the month, and I'm hoping that I'll get it published in short order. And I want to believe, Q1 in 26 or even Q4 of this year. Yeah,
Okay, we are all waiting for it. Thank you so much. I just, I love it because I feel like when you speak, it's like this is Kellogg culture. It's what we want to talk and want. This is what we need to carry forward. So thank you so much for coming and inspiring so many others. Thank you,
my
Jenny.
pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.